A dead man on a beach. No wallet, no name. Every label cut from his clothing. For 73 years, nobody knew who he was. Then DNA gave him a name. And the name made everything worse. Because the man on the beach was not who anyone expected, and the only person who could have explained what happened had already spent 58 years making sure no one would ever find out. On the evening of November 30th, 1948, a couple named John and Lydia Lyons were walking along Somerton Park Beach in Adelaide, Australia, past the seawall opposite the crippled children's home. They noticed a well-dressed man lying against the stones. John Lyons watched the man slowly raise one arm into the air, then let it fall limp. They assumed he was drunk, but they did not stop. They kept walking. Half an hour later, a woman named Olive Neal passed the same spot. She watched the man for several minutes. She later told police, "I did think something was wrong with this man, but I had no foundation for it." She kept walking too. A third witness, Gordon Straps, noticed that mosquitoes were swarming that evening. The air was thick with them, yet the man on the seawall did not swat at a single one. He did not flinch. He did not move. Remember the mosquitoes. They matter. 3 people saw a man dying on a beach. All 3 walked away. By 6:30 the next morning, 2 jockeys found his body in the same position, legs stretched out, ankles crossed, head propped against the wall. He looked like he had fallen asleep and simply not woken up. However, there was one detail the jockeys noticed immediately. A half-smoked cigarette was still resting on his collar. It had not fallen. It had not been brushed away. He had not thrashed, had not convulsed, had not moved at all. Whatever killed him either worked instantly or so slowly he never fought it. Police started going through his pockets and immediately ran into something strange. He had a packet of Army Club cigarettes, but when they opened it, the cigarettes inside were Kensitas, a completely different brand. Why would someone put one brand of cigarettes in another brand's packet? Nobody had an answer, but it was about to get stranger. He also carried matches, chewing gum, and an American-made aluminum comb. He had a used bus ticket from Adelaide and an unused second-class railway ticket. That unused ticket meant he had planned to travel somewhere else. He never made it. Yet, here is what he did not have. No wallet, no money, not a single penny, no identification of any kind. Not a driver's license, not a letter, not a scrap of paper with a name on it. Nothing. Then detectives checked his clothing and the investigation changed direction entirely. Every single label had been cut out. Not torn cut, with a blade, carefully and deliberately, from every garment. Jacket, shirt, trousers, tie, pullover, everything. This was not an accident. Someone had systematically removed anything that could connect this man to a name, a shop, or a country. But the tailoring on his jacket was American in style. He was in Australia. Why was an unidentified man wearing American clothes on an Australian beach? His shoes looked as though they had been polished that morning. His hands were well manicured, no calluses. His nails were clean. He did not look like a manual laborer. He looked like someone who worked with precision, not force. Remember his hands. They matter later. The pathologist, Dr. John Dwyer, performed the autopsy the next day. Outside, nothing. No injuries, no marks, no signs of struggle. But inside, a different story. The spleen was 3 times its normal size. The liver was failing. There was blood mixed with food in his stomach. His pupils were constricted. His heart was paralyzed. Dwyer told investigators, "I am quite convinced the death." So police ran chemical tests on the blood. Nothing. They tested the organs. Nothing. They tested everything they had. Not a single trace of any known substance. Whatever killed this man did not just kill him, it disappeared from his body. Toxicologist Sir Cedric Stanton Hicks suggested two possible poisons: digitalis, extracted from the foxglove plant, which stops the heart, and strophanthine, a rare compound from African plant seeds historically used on arrow tips. Both could kill without leaving evidence. Both required specialist knowledge. However, neither could be confirmed because neither left a detectable trace using 1948 forensic technology. The perfect poison for the perfect murder was a perfect suicide. At the inquest, Coroner Cleland said the poison was not accidentally administered. That phrase shut down one theory immediately, because up to that point, there was a simple explanation. The man had been found near a woman's home. In his clothing, investigators would later find a scrap of Persian love poetry about desire, fate, and death, with the final words, "It is ended." Maybe he was heartbroken. Maybe he came to Adelaide, swallowed something, and lay down on the beach to die. The poetry fit, the location fit, everything fit. But you do not accidentally administer poison to yourself. Those were not the coroner's casual words. That was a legal finding. Someone else did this to him. And whoever it was used something so precise that no laboratory in Australia could detect it. Suicide was off the table. So if he did not kill himself, who did? To understand how police connected the dead man to a woman, we need to jump ahead 5 months. In April 1949, Professor Cleland re-examined the body and found something that every previous examiner had missed. Deep inside the trouser pocket, in a tiny fob pocket that had been hand-sewn into the garment not by a factory, but by someone with a needle and thread, he found a scrap of paper, tightly rolled, smaller than a postage stamp. Tamam Shud. It is ended, torn from the last page of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poetry about wine, desire, fate, and death. Police put out a public appeal for anyone who owned a copy of the Rubaiyat with a torn last page. For months, nothing. Then in July 1949, a chemist named John Freeman came forward. His brother-in-law had found a copy of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back seat of Freeman's unlocked car on Jetty Road in Glenelg. Not placed tossed, like someone was getting rid of it in a hurry. However, this was not just any copy. It was a rare New Zealand edition, printed by Whitcomb and Toombs, one of very few copies of this particular printing known to exist in the world. The last page was torn out. The missing piece matched the dead man's scrap exactly. Detectives examined the book under ultraviolet light. On the inside back cover, invisible to the naked eye, they found 5 lines of capital letters scratched into the paper. The second line was crossed out. Someone had written it, reconsidered, and scratched through it. They changed their mind mid-message, and below the code, penciled faintly, was a local telephone number. They traced the number. It belonged to a woman named Jessica Thompson, a 27-year-old former nursing student living on Mosley Street in Glenelg, less than a 10-minute walk from Somerton Beach. She was living alone with her baby son, Robin. The boy's father was never publicly identified. Jessica told police she had given a copy of the Rubaiyat to an army lieutenant named Alf Boxall in Sydney in 1945. She inscribed a verse inside and signed it Justin. So detectives tracked Boxall down. He was alive. He was well. And he still had his copy completely intact, every page present. That meant the book in Freeman's car was not Boxall's copy. It was a second copy. Jessica Thompson had given away at least 2 copies of this specific book to 2 different men. One ended up with a living army officer. The other ended up in a stranger's car with a coded message, her phone number, and a torn page that matched the scrap in a dead man's hidden pocket. She was not handing out gifts. She was running a system. Detective Sergeant Lynn took a plaster cast of the dead man's face. He drove to Mosley Street. He knocked on the door. Jessica opened it. Lynn held up the cast. She stared at it. Lynn later wrote in his report that she appeared completely taken aback, to the point of giving the appearance that she was about to faint. He asked her if she recognized the man. She said no. Lynn did not believe her. However, his superiors did not press the matter, and Jessica Thompson never spoke about the Somerton Man again. Not to police, not to reporters, not to her own children. Not once. She died in 2007, 58 years. Total silence. Was she protecting herself? Was she protecting someone else? Or was she terrified of whoever had killed the man on the beach? In January 1949, police traced a brown suitcase to the cloakroom at Adelaide railway station. An orange thread inside matched the thread in the dead man's trousers. The case had been checked in on November 30th, the day before the body was found, and its label, like the labels on his clothing, had been removed. Inside, detectives found clothes, pajamas, slippers, and a collection of tools that seemed unusual for a traveler. A screwdriver, a table knife that had been ground down into a short, sharp blade, scissors with sharpened points, and a stencil brush. Remember those tools, and remember the hands well manicured, no calluses. Those two details do not seem connected yet, but they will be. Several items in the suitcase bore the name T. Keane. Police investigated every T. Keane in Australia. Not a single one had any connection to the dead man. A planted name, a false identity designed to send investigators down the wrong path, yet another dead end. And then there was the soap dish. Inside it, detectives found a single hairpin, a woman's hairpin. No woman was supposed to be connected to the suitcase, yet someone's hair had been near this man's soap. Police also noticed sand in the cuffs of a second pair of trousers. The dead man had been to another beach before Somerton. Where? Why? Nobody knew then. Nobody knows now. But someone had been walking on sand before they ended up dead on different sand. The 5 lines of capital letters found under ultraviolet light were these: WRG, OAB, ABD, MLIAOI. This line crossed out: WTBIMPANETP, MLIABOAIAQC, ITTMTSAMSTGAB. Military cryptographers tried to crack it. University teams tried. Over the following decades, amateur code breakers, intelligence analysts, and eventually artificial intelligence all tried. Yet every single attempt failed. The code remains unbroken to this day. But the second line, the one that was crossed out, has always bothered investigators. Someone wrote it, stopped, and deliberately scratched through it. Was the second line a mistake? Was it the wrong word in the wrong sequence? Or was it the most important line of all, the one someone needed to erase? Some analysts believe the code is a one-time pad cipher, the encryption method used by Soviet agents for communications that are mathematically unbreakable without the key. Others believe it is a first-letter code, where each letter represents the first letter of a word. Yet others believe it is not a code at all, just random letters. But the dead man kept this scrap in a hand-sewn pocket, torn from a rare edition of a poetry book with a woman's phone number written below it. That is not the behavior of someone scribbling nonsense. So, who was this man? What was his connection to Jessica Thompson? What did the code say? Who wrote it? And why did someone kill him with a poison that no laboratory in the country could detect? By 1950, the investigation was cold. The body was buried at West Terrace Cemetery under a headstone that read "The Unknown Man." And for the next 7 decades, the most popular answer to all of those questions was one word: espionage. The Cold War had just begun. Soviet spy rings had been uncovered across Australia, and Adelaide sat within striking distance of the Woomera test range, one of the most classified missile testing facilities in the Southern Hemisphere, where Britain and Australia were secretly developing long-range weapons. Now, look at the evidence through that lens. Cutting every label from your clothing is not something a heartbroken man does. It is textbook intelligence, tradecraft, exactly what operatives are trained to do to prevent identification if captured or killed. A coded message in a book, that is a one-time pad, cipher, the encryption method Soviet agents used for unbreakable communications. Using a book of poetry as a cipher key, a documented spy technique. A poison that left no trace? Exactly the method an intelligence service would use to eliminate an agent without leaving evidence. And the American tailoring? Intelligence operatives frequently wore clothing from other countries to confuse identification. Now consider Jessica Thompson, a woman whose phone number was in a dead agent's codebook, a woman who had distributed copies of the cipher key to at least 2 different men, a woman with wartime connections through Alf Boxall, who turned out to have his own intelligence background. Her refusal to speak for 58 years was not grief, and it was not stubbornness. It was operational security. She was not a heartbroken nurse. She was a handler distributing cipher keys to different operatives, maintaining contacts, keeping the network alive. For 73 years, this was the accepted answer. Books were written about it. Documentaries were filmed. Military cryptographers from multiple countries worked on the code. The Somerton Man became, in the minds of millions, a Cold War spy who had been silenced by his own side or by the other. The theory explained everything. Every piece of evidence fit. Every question had an answer. It was neat, logical, and complete. But in 2022, DNA proved it was almost certainly wrong. In 1995, an electrical engineering professor at the University of Adelaide named Derek Abbott read about the Somerton Man and could not stop thinking about him. He was not a detective. He was not a forensic scientist. He was a man who solved technical puzzles for a living, and the Somerton Man was the puzzle that consumed him. Abbott spent years digging through every piece of evidence. He tracked down the family of Jessica Thompson's son, Robin, who had died in 2009, and he found something remarkable. Robin's ear had an unusual formation. The upper hollow was larger than the lower, a trait found in roughly 1% of the population. The Somerton Man's autopsy photos showed the same ear. But Abbott found a second match. Robin was also missing both lateral incisor teeth, a hereditary condition found in roughly 1% of people. The Somerton Man was missing the same teeth, 2 traits, each one in 100, both present in the same 2 people. The odds of that happening by coincidence were 1 in 10,000. Abbott was certain. Robin Thompson was the dead man's biological son. That certainty changed his life. He contacted Robin's ex-wife, Roma Egan. Roma told him that Robin had looked like the Somerton Man. Then Abbott met Roma's daughter, Rachel. They fell in love. In 2010, the professor who had spent 15 years trying to identify Australia's most famous unidentified body married the granddaughter of the woman at the center of the mystery. From that point on, Derek Abbott was not just a researcher. He had a personal stake in the answer. He spent the next decade lobbying the South Australian government to exhume the body for DNA testing. He was rejected again and again. However, in 2017, he convinced the lab to test 3 hairs found trapped in the 1949 plaster bust, the same bust that had nearly made Jessica Thompson faint. The result? Haplogroup H4A1A, a genetic lineage found in about 1% of Europeans. It was the first biological evidence in the history of the case. In 2019, the Attorney General finally granted approval for exhumation. But the digging did not happen in daylight. On the night of May 19, 2021, a forensic team opened the grave at West Terrace Cemetery in darkness. The exhumation was conducted overnight officially to avoid the media circus. Yet there was something unsettling about a 73-year-old mystery being dug up in the middle of the night. Abbott partnered with Colleen Fitzpatrick, an American forensic genealogist from the DNA Doe project. They extracted DNA from the remains and built a family tree of 4,000 possible relatives, cross-referencing genetic data with historical records, birth certificates, marriage registers, and electoral rolls. 4,000 names, then 3,000, then 100, then 10, then 1. On July 26, 2022, Derek Abbott announced that the Somerton Man was Carl Webb. Carl Webb, born 1905, Footscray, Melbourne, youngest of 6 children. His father was German-born. The family ran a bakery in Springvale until the Depression killed it. Carl trained as an electrical instrument maker and worked as an electrical fitter. Now, remember, his hands well manicured, no calluses. Everyone who examined the body assumed that meant he was not a manual laborer. But Carl Webb was an electrician, a man whose profession required fine motor skills with delicate instruments, not brute force, not calloused hands, precise ones. The hands matched perfectly. They had just been read wrong for 73 years. And those tools in the suitcase, the screwdriver, the stencil brush, the knife ground down to a fine blade, they were not spy equipment. They were not assassination tools. They were an electrician's working kit. Every item that had fueled the espionage theory for 7 decades turned out to have the most ordinary explanation imaginable. In 1941, at 35, Carl married Dorothy Robertson, a 21-year-old food specialist. They lived in a flat in South Yarra, Melbourne. In April 1947, Carl walked out on her and disappeared. For 19 months, he did not appear on a single electoral roll, employment record, or government document in Australia. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody knew what he did. And then his body turned up on a beach in Adelaide, 1,000 kilometers from home. Nobody reported him missing. Not his wife, not his 5 siblings, not a single person in his life. A man vanished from the earth and the world did not notice. Abbott told reporters, "I am 100% convinced that we have the right guy." His DNA matched living descendants of Webb's siblings. Abbott described the process as a Sudoku puzzle with 4,000 elements. It was confirmed. But confirmed is not the same as explained. Not a spy, not an intelligence operative, not a Cold War agent. An electrician from Melbourne whose marriage fell apart. The identification demolished the spy theory overnight. Carl Webb was a working-class instrument maker from Footscray. He had no connection to any intelligence service, no link to Woomera, no government record of any kind. 73 years of the most widely accepted theory in Australian criminal history, gone in a single DNA result. But the DNA destroyed something much closer to Derek Abbott. For years, he had been certain that Robin Thompson was the dead man's son. The matching ear, the matching teeth, 1 in 10,000 odds. That certainty was what had led him to Roma, Egan, to Rachel, to his marriage, to the exhumation itself. The DNA said Carl Webb and Robin Thompson were not related at all, not father and son, not cousins, no shared genetic material whatsoever. The matching ear and the matching teeth, both at 1% probability, were a coincidence, so unlikely it had fooled every researcher who looked at the case for decades. Abbott had married into a family he believed was connected to the Somerton Man by blood. The DNA proved the connection did not exist. He was right about the name. He was wrong about everything that led him to it. And yet, the identification made every remaining question harder, not easier. If Carl Webb was just a man whose marriage fell apart, why cut every label from his clothing? Why carry a coded message in a hand-sewn pocket? Why was Jessica Thompson's phone number in a rare book tossed into a stranger's car? Why did she nearly faint when she saw his face and then say nothing for 58 years? How did a working-class electrician end up killed by a poison so advanced that no laboratory in the country could detect it? Who wrote the code? What does it mean? Was the second line crossed out by mistake, or was it the most important line? If the spy theory is wrong, then why does every single piece of evidence still look exactly like espionage? And if it is not espionage, what is it? After the identification, one more detail surfaced that nobody could explain. Carl Webb's estranged wife Dorothy had not stayed in Melbourne after he walked out. She had moved to Butte, a tiny town of 800 people in rural South Australia, 89 miles from Adelaide. Both Webb and the Thompsons had connections to Melbourne. Dorothy ended up 89 miles from the city where her estranged husband would be found dead. Some web of relationships connected these people across 2 cities and 2 states, but every person who could have explained it, Carl, Jessica, Dorothy, Prosper Thompson, Robin, is now dead. The 5-line coded message on the back of the Rubaiyat has been analyzed by military cryptographers, university teams, and artificial intelligence. It remains unbroken. The cause of death has never been officially determined. South Australia police said they were cautiously optimistic about the identification, but have never confirmed it. For years after the Somerton Man was buried at West Terrace Cemetery, under a headstone that read, "The Unknown Man," someone placed flowers on his grave. No card, no name. They came regularly. Then, at some point, they stopped. No one ever found out who left them. Carl Webb left his wife in April 1947 and disappeared. 19 months later, he was dead on a beach with a scrap of Persian poetry in a hidden pocket. The poetry was about desire, fate, and death. The last 2 words were, "It is ended." His code is not, and nobody, not his wife, not his siblings, not a single person in his life ever came looking for him. What's your theory, spy, poisoned lover, or something nobody's considered yet? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.